Hello, this is Joe Polish, president of Piranha Marketing and founder of the Genius Network interview series, and you're about to hear one of my Genius Network interviews, and I just want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this, and I hope you find it very useful. If you want to find out more information about some of the interviews and resources that can help you in your business, you can go to www.joepolish.com. And we have a Joe Polish Recommends section with all kinds of resources and vendors and services and products that we recommend that can help you in your business. And also for more useful interviews and a whole list of other people that I've interviewed, you can go to www.geniusnetwork.com. Thanks and enjoy the interview.
Hello, this is Joe Polish, and I've got my good friend Mr. Tim Ferriss on the line to do a Genius Network interview on his brand new book, The 4-Hour Body. Tim, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I am in wintry New York City for a change, setting up the war room. So things are going very well.
I'm in rainy Toronto at my good friend Dan Sullivan's home. So you just had this new book, The 4-Hour Body, just come out, and I just want to let all of our listeners know that I have not even read the whole book. I just started getting into it, and I wanted to do an interview with Tim like immediately and share any wisdom, actionable takeaways, small tweaks that you can do to your body to get disproportional results. And so far what I've read, Tim, unbelievable. The book is gigantic. You could probably kill somebody with this thing. It's over 560-something pages. And it's awesome what I've read so far. Now, I want to ask you, first off, what is the purpose of this new book? Because you're known for the 4-Hour Work Week, but now you got a whole new book on a completely different subject, the human body.
Yeah, I appreciate the kind introduction, first of all. Secondly, the book seems disconnected from the first for a lot of people because the 4-Hour Work Week was productivity business. It's still in the New York Times list 3 years later. But the reality is that my obsession with physical tracking my physical data, food, workouts, predates all of that by at least 10 years. And many people also don't realize that I ran a sports nutrition company for 8 years that had distribution in about 15 countries. So this book is the book I wanted to write all along. And I didn't want to write it until I had access to the best scientists, the best doctors, the best athletes and coaches around the world, and the only way that happened was through the 4-Hour Work Week. So once I had access to all of those resources and people, that's when I decided to really make myself a human guinea pig, even more so than I had already, and test all of these things. So from strength to endurance to fat loss to sex to sleep, and to create this choose-your-own-adventure book of sorts. And as you said, the book is a big book. It's 560-some pages, and it's intended to really be read in bite-sized chunks. So it's useful to think of, and I'm sure you already noticed this, it's almost like a cookbook. So you're never going to read a cookbook from A to Z. You sit down, you pick what it is that you want to produce with your recipe, and in this case, maybe you want to lose 20 pounds of fat in 4 weeks. Maybe you want to get to running a marathon in 12 weeks, even though you've never run more than 5 miles before. And that's what the book is for. But I feel, and you probably saw the anecdote related to you in the introduction, and Richard Branson, that by improving the physical machine, and most of what we think is genetically fixed really is not at all. It's very flexible. By making our physical selves the best possible, it transfers to everything else. So you become more productive, your relationships improve, your cognitive function improves. And I feel like this is where I can have the biggest impact. Outside of the productivity and all that, I think this is actually the most important thing I've ever written.
Yeah. I will tell you, yes, I did see that part about what my conversation with Richard Branson, so I'm so happy you put that in the book. And what I think is really cool is you have this section right in the very beginning where it says how to use this book, 5 rules, and one of the rules is think of the book as a buffet, and then, pick one appearance goal and one performance goal, which is really cool because, how you look and how you perform, how you feel. And you have it totally laid out, so it's super easy for people to really say, this is what I want: rapid fat loss, rapid muscle gain, rapid strength gain, rapid sense of total well-being. And, you pretty much cover so many different things, like you said, improving sex, sleep, losing weight, gaining weight. There's another thing that you say in here which I think is cool in the rules. I'll just say the rules. The second rule is skip the science if it's too dense. The third rule you have is please be skeptical. The fourth rule is don't use skepticism as an excuse for inaction. And rule number 5, enjoy it. And I will tell you, Tim, I mean, we're friends, and I want everyone to know that I'm going to hit him with some devil advocate questions, of course. But, this is one of the best reads I've had in ages. This book is awesome. I was even telling Dan Sullivan, I said, man, he's such a fantastic writer. So I was actually reading some stuff to Dan last night, and, and those of you that don't know, Dan Sullivan is the founder of Strategic Coach, which is the highest level coaching program in the world for successful entrepreneurs. So he's a very bright guy. But there's one part where you even tell people be skeptical of my book and everything that I say, but you say be proactively skeptical, not defensively skeptical. I'd like to ask you about that before we kind of get into some content, and then I ask you a weird question about how I happen to have a cold today, and that's why I sound this way. So you sound very sultry today. Yes, don't I? Yeah, I'm feeling a little stuffed up and weird and everything, so this will be kind of a strange interview, especially on your book, The 4-Hour Body, so I want to see what advice you got for me.
Sure. So the reactively skeptical or defensively skeptical versus, so it's defensive skepticism versus proactive skepticism. We could make it even easier. We could just say passive skepticism and active skepticism. All right. So active skepticism, in my definition, is a good thing. It means that you test assumptions, you ask the hard questions, you challenge your own beliefs and the beliefs of others to find out what actually works the best for you. So in that case, let's just say you're testing different ways to reduce acne. Okay, so you're going to look at tetracycline, which is a drug. You're going to remove dairy for a period, et cetera, and you're skeptical of the drug company claims because you think that they haven't proven their data. Okay, that's being proactively skeptical. You're really aiming for an outcome. You're looking to take the right action. Defensively or passively skeptic people are armchair critics. They basically shoot down the ideas of others and challenge the ideas of others with no action intended at all. It's simply to critique and to, in many cases, just lower people from where they might be. And I think that it's very easy to slip into defensive skepticism where you should really be proactive. And keeping those two separate in your mind are very important. Like, am I challenging this person's belief because we're trying to get to the right answer, or am I challenging this belief just because I want to make a point or feel right? And if it's the latter, just skip it. If it's the former, okay, that's a good thing. So I encourage people to be skeptical of the things that I say, meaning I don't claim to have all of the answers, and readers, I expect, will find even better approaches. But don't say, that's nonsense. He hasn't shown me a 10-year longitudinal peer-reviewed study that can prove that, so I'm not going to do anything until I get that study. Because guess what? Even if the best, most controlled, randomized studies were done for, let's say, obesity, you wouldn't get the results literally for probably a decade. So does that mean that you're not going to improve your diet for the next 10 years? That's ridiculous. But that's exactly the position that a lot of people take. Yeah, big time. I mean, you have some great examples that you talk about in there too, about the length of time it takes for something, a drug or anything to actually get to the mainstream public, which in many cases is 10 or 20 years. And anyway, you're going to, I think, turn so much of the whatever industry you want to call it, health, fitness, whatever, on its head with what you talk about here. Now, so before we get into some really actionable takeaways and small tweaks that people can make, because I know you got a ton of them, and this book is just filled with it. I've got this silly cold here. What would you do if you were me? This is not scripted here, by the way. I just want to let everyone know I'm just asking Tim out of the blue here. So I'm in a pretty good position today because it's cold season, flu season for a lot of people. I actually just came back from Mexico, where I got very sick leaving Mexico, and then it really hit me hard just a few days ago. And a few days ago, I could barely speak because it felt like I was gargling with gravel. I mean, I felt horrible. And the approach that I would suggest experimenting with would be a combination of things. The first would be L-lysine, which is an amino acid, L-lysine, L-Y-S-I-N-E. And you can work up to, again, I'm not a doctor, so I have to say, check with your doctor before using any supplements. If you're pregnant, lactating, blah, 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 or if you have cross-eyed, don't take these things or whatever. But, with all those caveats, L-lysine, 6 to 8 grams per day. You would then take high-dose vitamin C, so you'd aim to take between 10 and 20 grams of vitamin C per day. The best way to do that commercially, if you're not using an IV, is to get effervescent vitamin C, so Emergen C. You may have seen this brand of vitamin C. There's a vitamin C light, which doesn't have a bunch of added sugars and sweeteners. Get those, and the effervescent quality of that product will help with delivery, so you'll have less stomach upset. So if I take capsules or pills, I can only really tolerate, I would say, 8 to 10 grams per day. With the powdered effervescent vitamin C, I can easily do 20 grams per day. And I would suggest taking as much as you can tolerate. And tolerate is to gut tolerance or bowel tolerance, so you will certainly know when you should stop. And then, last but not least, I would recommend echinacea. So get an extract, and you'll simply put that into the water when you mix in the vitamin C, and you can take that at the same time. Echinacea is actually, when it's used properly, very strong. It has some very strong properties, so you don't want to use it all the time. People tend to use it all the time, and that would be like using antibiotics all the time. But in this particular case, yes, it makes sense to use. And then garlic would be another. So just add garlic to pretty much everything that you take. And that's it. But the magic combination here, I think for most people, is really the high-dose vitamin C plus the L-lysine.
Okay, well, awesome. Well, I appreciate that. So, yeah, this is the first time I've caught a cold in quite a while, because I actually stay pretty darn well from eating pretty clean and exercising all the time and all that stuff, much of which I've learned from you. And now what I'm realizing is there's so much more here. Okay, so let's get into your book. The first question I got to ask you is, the obvious skeptical question, the 4-hour body. I mean, this sounds kind of like 8-minute abs or something. So, what exactly? Once I start reading the book, I mean, it totally made sense to me, because there's many things people can learn in 10 minutes that could dramatically, impact their life in many ways. But I want you to kind of explain the choice of title.
Yeah, I seem destined to choose book titles that make whatever I write seem like a hoax for whatever reason. But the 4-hour work week, of course, became a very strong brand. The 4-hour body was not the original title. It was originally going to be Becoming Superhuman. And testing that title, we realized that it had a very poor response from women in particular, and men who had a lot of improvement left to go. So people who had 50, 100 pounds to lose, who definitely can use this book effectively. I mean, they're case studies. My dad, I helped my dad lose 90 pounds of fat and gain 20 or 25 pounds a month when he's 66. Those people, when they heard superhuman, assumed it was for people who were already at, let's say, 6% body fat trying to get to 4%, and it didn't work out. So the 4-hour body was based on the previous brand and also based on one of the chapters. So there's a chapter in which I gained 34 pounds of muscle in 28 days, which is all tracked by a PhD at San Jose State University using hydrostatic underwater weighing and everything. Also decreased my cholesterol from about 222, I think it was 222 to 147 in 4 weeks, and lost 3 pounds of fat in the same period of time. And it took 2 30-minute workouts per week, so it's 4 hours per month of exercise. So when people hear 4 hours, they're like, 4 hours a day, 4 hours a week? It's like, actually, that's 4 hours a month for most of these things. And, I mean, there's another woman in the book. She lost 100-plus pounds of fat, and she's in incredible shape now. She's a mother of 2, looks 10 years younger, and she did it with a few kettlebell exercises. Initially, it was 20 minutes per session, 2 or 3 sessions per week. So again, we're looking at about 4 hours a month of training. Pretty amazing. So that's the origin of the title of the book.
Gotcha. Yeah, and you do have it laid out in the book with pictures and everything. So this, like I said to everyone, this is definitely a reference book, but it's also very actionable. And you have a joke in the beginning, which I just got to bring up. Where you say that the conversation you're having with I can't remember Clive's last name, but you say that the major you say that the major fears of modern man can be boiled down to 2 things: too much email and getting fat. I just need you to elaborate or comment on that, because I think if someone really sits and thinks about that, which I did, I underlined that. I'm like, oh damn, there's a lot of wisdom there.
So, I was being interviewed by Clive Thompson, who's a staff writer at Wired magazine, and we were doing a bit of preamble, just warming up, talking to each other before recording the phone call, much like we did before we spoke today, started speaking today. And the point that I made, we were talking about Twitter and email and different tools, and he was talking about digital overwhelm, and that's when I said that it seems like the 2 major fears of modern man can be boiled down to those 2 things, too much email and too much fat. And when you think about it, it's pretty accurate. If you look at how much of our behavior, how much of the complaining, how much of the I wish it could be different is related to those 2 things, it's really a very, very high percentage. And that was the point at which I really realized I had to write this book, because I've recorded almost every workout I've done since age 18. My house looks like an ER. I've had thousands of blood tests done. I know at this point really the few things that work. Out of the 1,000 fad diets you could try, I've tried them all. Out of the 1,000 drugs you could try to improve your brain function and short-term memory, I've tried all those. And not only have I tried them, but I've measured the results. And then if 2 or 3 things work, I'll go find a few women, a few men, and I'll test the approaches on them to make sure I can replicate the results. So I knew at that point, speaking to Clive and then sharing that joke with some of my friends who all agreed with it, that it was really time to write this book, because there's so many people who are incredibly effective at work, incredibly effective as CEOs, as startup founders, as artists, as whatever their profession might be. They're kick-ass in almost everything, but they believe that they can't change their physical state, or that they can't change their physical state much. Let's say they were the last kid picked on the kickball team or the presidential fitness test. They could never do the minimum number of pull-ups, whatever it was. There are people who have carried that self-imposed limitation for their entire lives, and they accept this certain partial completeness, which is what one engineer friend of mine called it, who recently lost at least 50 pounds. And once he found a few things that he could measure, it was easy. It was really easy for him to lose weight. And it just took that one moment, which in the book I call the Harajuku Moment. It's actually named after this engineer because he was in Japan and he was visiting a part of Tokyo called Harajuku, which is where all the fashionable high school kids and college kids go to buy a lot of their fashion. And they went into a couple of different stores to buy clothing, and he left the store, sat down on the sidewalk with one of his other friends and said, it doesn't really matter what I buy because I'm not going to look good in it anyway. And there was this awkward moment of silence, and it was then that he realized, I need to do something about this. This is the only area of my life where I have accepted mediocrity, and that was the trigger. So part of getting people to really experience some tremendous changes, like whether it's my dad who lost 90 pounds, or whether it's, in my case, where I've increased my deadlift from like 300 to 630, at least from rack pulls, certainly. And or going from running 5 miles to 50 miles, or whatever it might be, it's important to first have that moment of clarity where you realize what it is that you want to change, and then you start measuring a few things. And at that point, it actually becomes quite simple if you know the right unorthodox method to use.
Yeah, well, you know, you said something interesting. You talk about this in the book, that you've tracked all your workouts since age 18. I mean, you know, and then we'll come back to Chad, the guy you're talking about, too. You have a picture. It's a great story. I mean, literally, I just got done reading it, you know, earlier this morning before I, you know, was going to call you a couple hours later. So it is such a huge, like, aha for many people. And what I loved about this book so far is that, having read the 4-Hour Work Week, and you know, literally have created a movement with the way people look at productivity, the way people look at time. So much of it relates. It just reminded me to see where so much of your thinking came from and how you applied it to productivity in the 4-Hour Work Week, and hear how you apply the same principles of, you know, Pareto, you know, the 80-20, which you actually break down into what's the 2.5% of things that are going to produce the massive amount of change and effectiveness, you know, which you detail in this book very, very well. You mentioned you tracked all your workouts since age 18. I mean, what sort of insane, crazy person does that? And what exactly does that mean, you tracked it? Did you carry a yellow pad around? I mean, what exactly did you do?
Yeah, so in this case, mildly OCD, just a little. I used bound notebooks. So I'm in my hotel room right now in New York City, and I have one of my notebooks right in front of me that I'm recording my workouts in for this week. And I have those notebooks this day. I also have digital copies, so I do use tools and have used tools like dailyburn.com. There are a lot of very, very good tools for tracking exercise and diet now, using an iPhone, for example, which is how I would certainly do it if you have that option. But in the beginning, I used paper, and I have probably 20 notebooks, thick-bound notebooks full of workouts, and I have them to this day. I mean, I have my workouts from the 90s, and what I can do in almost every case is, let's say I see a photograph of myself from 6 years ago, and I want to look the way I did in that photograph. Okay, when I look at the date of the photograph, I go to my workouts, I do the 4 to 6 weeks of workouts before that photograph was taken, and shazam, done. I look like I did in that photograph. And it's a pretty cool trick. Now, there are certain things you have to tweak, of course. You know, if you're 40 and the photograph was taken when you were 20, well, you're going to probably need to do things to optimize your, in this case, optimize is a good word, and I know you and I share this interest in vocabulary, but to optimize your hormone levels for things like muscular gain or fat loss. So, as an example, just a real specific takeaway for people, doctors are very, very useful. I know a lot of world-class doctors. They're incredible at what they do, but the reality is most doctors do not, it's not their job to test for certain things. An example of that would be nutrient deficiencies. So I would suggest that everyone who's serious about their health, if you have the budget, to get a test done like SpectraCell. Okay, so SpectraCell is SpectraCell.com, and allegedly used by Lance Armstrong, but that's alleged. I use this test to get an accurate picture of my nutrient deficiencies, and this is a blood test. It's very easy to do. You go in, you get blood drawn, you're done. And I identified a selenium deficiency. So most people aren't familiar with what selenium is. It doesn't even matter. You can get it from foods like Brazil nuts and so forth. But I had a severe selenium deficiency, and I never would have identified this otherwise. As soon as I fixed that selenium deficiency and one or two other things, I tripled my testosterone. This is with diet alone. And tripling your testosterone has a profound impact on your quality of life, on your performance, on your sleep, on your sex drive, everything you could possibly imagine. And it was by taking a test that cost me something like $200. That is the best possible investment of your money.
Yeah, I hear you.
To get, I mean, it is the force multiplier. I mean, I just multiplied. It wasn't just additive. I multiplied my performance and experience across the board. And it was just identifying that one deficiency. And most general practitioners will not do that. It's not really their job, and there isn't a mechanism in place for them to do that and have their clinic compensated by insurance, et cetera. So the medical profession is fantastic, but there are problems, and there are areas where you need to be the arbiter of your health information, and you can do it really easily. I mean, you can spend less than you spend on a weekend out and get an incredible look at exactly where you are, exactly what you need to do to solve probably most of your health problems, sleep problems, fat loss problems with a snap of the fingers. Now, are there exceptions? Of course there are exceptions with different chronic diseases and so forth and so on. Can many of those be solved with simple dietary changes? Absolutely, for sure, without a doubt. I mean, I've seen diabetics reverse their condition through diet alone. You and I were sitting at the same table as someone who did this with their 2 kids. Type 1 diabetics, not suggesting anyone just go off insulin. That's crazy. But she was able to get her children off of insulin based on dietary intervention alone. That's incredible. This is not the type of thing that you see reported in clinical trials with hundreds of thousands of people. It just hasn't happened yet. I think that there's a lot that can be done with very, very little.
Yep, absolutely right. And you totally lay that out, and you give out websites, and you give out plenty of examples. And I would, you're going to definitely have your critics because of all of. I think you're literally going to expose so many people as what you are really good at. You're great at doing this in the 4-hour work week. Is you're absolutely fantastic at challenging basic assumptions, and you say that it's possible to stumble upon simple and unusual solutions to long-standing problems by simply challenging assumptions. And as an example, the lady that we're sitting down with, basically the children with the one child with diabetes, she's now put a website together, and she's helping other mothers and other families with this, with their children. And, but you're not going to see that on headlines, like you said. In your book, I don't think I've ever seen condensed in one place, literally something that's taken you, well over a decade of being your own human guinea pig to figure this stuff out, traveling the world, meeting with scientists, every type of workout. I mean, there's everything in here. I mean, you've got the sex sections, you consulted with, porn stars. I mean, there's all kinds of crazy stuff that are in here that people could learn. And, so I want to ask you one about people listening, the whole thing about assuming that what they hear and read is, the truth or will work. I'd like to get your thoughts on assumptions, and then I'd like to kind of go through a machine gun series of different little things that people can do that would have a big impact on their life. So what's your thoughts on assumptions?
So my thoughts on assumptions are, let me address that from a slightly different angle. So the sad state of affairs is that people feel like science is arbitrary. So many people in the general public feel like they'd be better off not listening to the science, because one week it tells you that you can eat butter, the next week it tells you butter's going to kill you, one week you can eat eggs, the next week you can't eat eggs. And the fact of the matter is that the science isn't arbitrary. Good science is good science, but journalists are oftentimes misrepresent, whether it's intentional or not, as do many other people with agendas as well. Certainly, it's true for many larger pharma companies, and I know people who work at these companies. So it's very important from the outset to train yourself to separate good science from bad science, and it's very easy. So there's an appendix in the book called Spotting Bad Science, and it just says, here are the 5 rules, here are the 5 questions you should ask yourself whenever you see a headline, whenever you see a claim, and it'll help you 9 times out of 10 immediately separate the fact from the fiction. And you'll be able to do that more effectively than most MDs after reading that one chapter, and that's not an exaggeration. In terms of assumptions are dangerous because they're often based on how often something is repeated. So So you hear, it's impossible to lose it's unhealthy to lose more than 2 pounds of fat per week. I mean, I don't know where that came from, but you hear it all the time. Or your body can't absorb more than 30 grams of protein in a meal. Really? Okay. Well, then I sent 3 researchers out into the world and said, find me anything that supports this. And they'd come back and say, can't find anything. It's like, okay, another urban myth. Who would have thought? And you hear many, many qualified, intelligent people repeating these things. And it's because you hear personal trainers, and don't get me wrong, there are amazing personal trainers, but there are also a lot of bad personal trainers repeating things that they just haven't investigated. So especially when it comes to the human body, the great thing about testing assumptions is that it can be very cheap and very, very fast. So you don't have to wait for some room full of, white-haired old men in lab coats to figure this out for you in many cases. It's like if you take dairy out of your diet, like as the example I gave before, let's give a really practical example because I'll segue into the rapid fire. Let's say that you replace your milk in your coffee. So let's say you have 2 cups of coffee a day. You usually have just a little bit of skim milk in that coffee. You replace that skim milk with a little bit of cinnamon and vanilla extract, which is extremely delicious as a side note. And you start to lose 2 to 5 pounds of fat per week, and you haven't changed anything else. Then let's just say you're a really good scientist, and you're like, you know what, I'm going to go back to milk for 2 weeks and see what happens, and then I'll go back to the cinnamon, just to make sure that it's due to the cinnamon and the vanilla extract. Well, that can be a very valid experiment, and that, in fact, is one of the things that we noticed with the 194 people that I was tracking for this particular dietary experiment, is that you could lose 2 to 5 pounds of fat per week just by getting rid of milk in your coffee if you plateaued in your fat loss. It's pretty amazing. And there are a lot of little things like that.
That's awesome. Well, that's the stuff I'd love to hear. I think it would be great for people to actually get this on the interview. And again, this is one of the times where I'll say on the interview, there is no possible way I could even begin to cover in a short period of time everything that's in the book. So I want this interview to be viewed as something that is will supplement it. And Tim, we talked very briefly before we started that you can, for everyone that actually does listen to this interview, you can give them some sort of incentive to get extra chapters and things that simply just aren't in the book, just for going and getting the book. So I'll ask you about that at the end. I can pick the subject and say, hey, what about this, Tim? Or else, whatever you feel would be really useful for people. Hit us.
I'll add one more fat loss recommendation, and then you pick the topic, and I'll throw out one of the findings.
Okay, cool.
So one more fat loss recommendation would be consume 20 or 30 grams of protein within 30 minutes of waking up. If you make that one change, you will lose a dramatic amount of body fat if you're currently not doing something like that. To give you an example, my dad had plateaued in his fat loss, and he was losing 7 or 8 pounds a month, which, don't get me wrong, that sounds great, but my standard for him was like 20 pounds a month. And if you have a lot of weight to lose, if you're not losing 5 pounds a week in the beginning, when I say a lot, I mean 50 to 100 pounds, then you're probably doing something wrong. But in his case, changed his protein intake so that he was just taking a MyoPledge shake. So he was taking Bill Phillips' product, a former product, and you just wake up, go to the refrigerator, pop one of these open as a ready to drink. Shake it, then open it, probably a better idea, and then slam this thing first thing in the morning, and he went from an average, at the time, I think it was about 5 pounds of fat loss per month to 17 pounds of fat loss per month. And that is a lot of weight.
Yeah.
That's a major multiple, okay? So those would be 2 really easy things. Get rid of the milk in your coffee, and milk in general, if you want to really focus on fat loss, and get your 20 to 30 grams of protein first thing in the morning. Another easy way to do that would be to eat hard-boiled eggs, and that's whole hard-boiled eggs. Get free-range organic eggs if you can, and just eat 2 or 3 hard-boiled eggs with whatever else you're going to have. And that alone will Also, if you do the eggs specifically, for whatever reason, while the protein has this effect, it will inhibit your appetite also. In studies, it's been shown 20 to 30% appetite inhibition just from doing that to the breakfast. So they're really easy things you can do. But let's jump on to some other topics. What should we talk about?
Okay, got it. You almost got more diet things, but I'll come back to the diet stuff. Sleep. I mean, you have a section in here, how to sleep 2 hours per day and feel fully rested. So, sleep recommendations.
So there are a number of extreme approaches that you can take that are very interesting. So if you want to reduce the amount of time you sleep, you can get down to about 2 to 2.5 hours of sleep a day using a split schedule with something called polyphasic sleep, so people can look up if they want. You can do that the wrong way and end up feeling really fatigued, so you want to make sure you get the details right. But some general recommendations just for sleep quality. The first would be, if you can, maintaining a temperature, and this seems to be true for most people, a room temperature between 67 and 70 degrees. The second recommendation would be saturated fat intake. So consuming a saturated fat rich meal about, I think it was within 2 hours of bedtime, dramatically improves quality of sleep. When I say quality, I measured all my brain waves and looked at long wave sleep, REM sleep, etc. So eating a high quality saturated fat meal, meaning let's say grass-fed beef or lamb, something that's not raised on something it shouldn't be eating, like corn, really helps. Okay, if you don't want to do that, we don't have time to go into the cholesterol debate. I'm a huge skeptic of pointing at cholesterol as the enemy by itself, but let's look at another option. There's a device called the Philips Blue Light, and you can find this pretty easily. The Philips Blue Light is usually used in the winter time for people with seasonal affective disorder, SAD, so people who get depressed in the winter. Use this device as a therapy, and it provides this bright blue light. What I decided to use it for is a replacement for coffee in the morning. So I wanted to see if it would affect my energy levels throughout the day, which it did. And so I would get this Philips Blue Light, put it off to the side of my computer or my coffee or my newspaper or whatever the hell I was doing in the morning, and let it point at me for 15 minutes. What I noticed is that by getting this bright light exposure in the morning, it cut my time to sleep. I was a chronic insomniac for my entire life, and I could lay in bed for an hour or 2 hours before getting to bed. When I used the blue light in the morning, my time to sleep was almost always less than 10 minutes, which is a miracle for me. And that was the variable that did it. So those are a few recommendations. There are probably 12 or so recommendations that I have for sleep, and people can just pick and choose the ones that are easiest for them.
Awesome. Love it. All right. So let's talk about, oh boy, I'm sitting there looking at all these topics. I mean, I'd almost rather someone read this, but I'm going to hit you with it anyway. How to produce 15-minute female orgasms.
I knew that was coming next. That is a pretty involved chapter. Well, let me ask you. This is going to get graphic, so if you have your 4-year-old listening to this call, you must. But do you want to talk about? We could talk about intercourse. We could talk about anything. But let's get into the details of the anatomy of the clitoris. Okay, so
I guess we're just going to get into it. So I was going to see if your question is okay, but I mean, go to whatever degree. I mean, you can talk about it, and then people.
Oh no! I'm up for it. I mean, this is important stuff. Sex is important. I included this because sex can make or break relationships, make or break marriages, make or break families, and we're too damn puritanical in this country to get into the details. It's always some ambiguous, love your partner and the sex will work itself out, and that's just not true. So rather than base it on the theories, I went out and did all the testing. So some chapters were more fun to research than others, but so for the clitoris, let's talk about that for a second. The most sensitive part of the clitoris for most women, if you're looking at it kind of head on, right? If you were in between the woman's legs looking at her, it would be at roughly 1 o'clock or like 1:30. 1 o'clock, 1:30 on the clitoris, that is the most sensitive area. And the men are simple creatures. I mean, to make us sexually happy, you could just give an index card to every woman in the world with like 5 bullet points and you're done. Women are slightly more complicated animals, and there's a lot of psychology that goes into it. So the easiest way to help a woman improve the quality of her orgasms or get her to the point where she can orgasm if she hasn't been able to in the past is to focus on very continued light pressure, light contact to that 1 o'clock, 1:30 point on the clitoris without any kissing, without any fondling, anything like that whatsoever. So you really need to develop the woman's attention and sensitivity to that area separately, and then you can incorporate it into sex and intercourse and so forth. But the key is treating it like a practice, and it's a very sensual practice. It's not in any way sterile in a bad way, but really developing that sensitivity and that accuracy, that precision first, and then you can move it into sex. And the results are pretty tremendous. I mean, that's one approach. There are a lot of details and tweaks, but success rate of over 95% in my experience and the experience of other people I had tested for me, which is pretty amazing. I mean, that's beyond my wildest expectations, because I just felt like it would be one of those problems that potentially could not be solved. You know, anatomically, perhaps 50% of the women out there claim they cannot experience a vaginal orgasm, and so I thought, well, you know, maybe this is just not going to happen. It's anatomically impossible, and I don't think that it is in most cases. And I'm sure people will debate that and dispute that with me, but I don't think it is. So that's part of the sex chapter.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And it's fully illustrated, by the way, in the 4-Hour Body. So people, you can check it out there. All right. So how to triple testosterone and double sperm count? You talk about that for one. Before like how to do it. Why does someone want to triple testosterone or double their sperm count?
Well, it depends. So for sperm count, God, I could go into that and terrify everyone on the call who's a male, but I mean, in healthy males in industrialized countries, the sperm count has been dropping by about 1% per year for the last, I think it's 20, 30 years. The exact numbers in the book. There are a lot of environmental problems that affect and degrade sperm count, sperm quality, motility, things like that. I won't give all the background, but the short answer is if you have your cell phone in your pocket, make sure it's off. And if that's the simplest recommendation I can make. There are other recommendations related to diet and so forth and so on, but I ended up removing myself from my pocket, and if it was in my pocket anywhere, it was off. And in a very short period of time, we're talking about one cycle for spermatogenesis, for spermgenesis, doubled my sperm count. Tripled my testosterone. The reason you'd want to do that depends largely on what your goal is. For me, I had testosterone that was, yes, it was in the healthy range, but for whatever reason, it was on the low range of normal, and that was very strange to me. Didn't think there was any problem whatsoever, but it ended up being dietary related. So, all things being equal, men tend to feel better when their testosterone's higher. Yep. And they perform better, they just look better, and they're more fun to be around.
Very true.
So, but also, I mean, certainly from a sports performance standpoint, I naturally got my testosterone to the point where it would have been on low-dose anabolics, like anabolic steroids, which is a whole separate topic altogether, which I also talk about in the book. I talk a lot about all of this stuff. I mean, all the taboo subjects that people brush off, I took a real close look at those fringes. But I would say that there are some cases where men are probably have clinically depressed testosterone, and chances are that they can address a lot of the problem without having to resort to some type of prescription medication. So those are a few of the reasons that I think it's worth trying some of the things in the book that are less side effect prone.
Yeah, and you're going to make a lot of cell phone manufacturers and mobile phone companies very unhappy. Yeah.
It's and this is part of the spotting bad science part. is that if you go into the research and you separate out the studies that have been, if you put the independent, the truly independent, independently funded studies on one side, and you put the industry sponsors, meaning Samsung, et cetera, I'm not sure if that's the exact company, it's just a hypothetical, in the other, you find that in the industry sponsor, you'll find, and this isn't the exact number, but it's like 25% of the studies have found problems with radiation related to cell phones, and then you look at the independents, and it's like 75%. So
right.
Take it with a grain of salt. Doesn't mean these companies are changing the data or anything like that, but should it raise a red flag so you take a closer look? Absolutely.
Yep, absolutely. Great. What about vegan versus raw versus meat eaters?
Yep. So I tried all this stuff as well, tracked things with blood tests. It really depends on how extreme you are. The short answer is, for each of those, that you can do a lot of damage to yourself on all three. Raw foods, there are many foods that are fantastic to consume raw, and then there are other foods that are better absorbed if they're cooked, and there are others that are better absorbed if they're steamed, for example. And I have a table in the book that gives examples of which are best based on studies, which are best steamed, which are best raw, from a bioavailability standpoint. Eating everything raw, generally not a good idea, I think. It depends on where you're sourcing your food, but if you live anywhere remotely urban, probably not a great idea. The vegan side of things, all I would say with that is if you're making that decision for a moral, environmental reason, I provide a lot of resources that I think would be interesting for vegans to read. But the one point I would say is you need to be extremely careful with fertility problems because soy, which often ends up being a staple in vegan diets, can cause a lot of endocrine problems. Thyroid issues, even at 30 grams a day. In Japanese subjects, who you would assume have a higher tolerance for such things, experience thyroid disruption. The incidence of all manner of endocrine problems with soy. So I would stay away from soy completely. That's another one that's going to be controversial, but from what I've seen, the data I've seen, that's the case. Secondly, gluten. So another staple, oftentimes, of vegan diets and vegetarian diets is gluten, and that can also cause issues with fertility, particularly in women. And you find that when women remove gluten, among other things, because it can affect digestion and the GI tract. It affects how estrogens are absorbed and so forth and so on. So I would say there are some very real concerns about long-term digestive and fertility problems on a vegan diet. And if you're going to make that decision, it's a very serious decision, and you just need to be aware of those factors so you can mitigate risks. And then in terms of meat eaters, there are a few things I'd say. So I did one experiment where I ate basically nothing but meat, grass-fed beef, and nuts for 3 weeks, and followed my blood cholesterol and everything else. And it really didn't have that effect at all. The fact of the matter, though, is that most meat eaters are so concerned with filling a third of their plate or half of their plate with meat that they don't think about the rest of the food. So that's where vegetarians are almost always much better educated. And this is something that Dr. John Berardi also discusses in the book. You really want to know where your food is sourced, where it's coming from, what the nutrients are in the vegetables and so forth. And I would say my diet is probably 70% plant-based, but I do consume high-quality meats, and I actually do think that some form of animal product is important. But I try to separate out the nutrition. I look at the nutritional aspect of it, the metabolic aspect of it, and the book is not the right forum to get into all of the moral and environmental questions, although I do discuss those very briefly.
Well, I know that you know, as usual, if someone doesn't, already read your blog at the 4-Hour Workweek, your blog for 4-Hour Body, this will be, I mean, you're just going to create. At the time we're doing this interview, I mean, I can't wait to see what's, a month from now. It's going to be pretty wild. But
it is going to be wild. Yeah, I'm going to get attacked from every corner of the known universe, but I'm prepared for that.
Yeah, well, let me ask, because let's take a few more minutes, and then I'm going to just tell people, get the darn book, because truly, I mean, just reading the introduction alone is worth the admission price for this book, and you really put a lot into this. I mean, I really respect the serious amount of research and time and everything, and you really put yourself out there and opening yourself up to have people be critics, but I also know that there's an outcome that you desire for the reader. And what is that outcome? I mean, what would you really want people? Why did you do this? I mean, you could have still made the same amount of money with a book, probably a third of the size of this book, but you just put it all out there, and you're definitely not a guy that's been overly promotional. You make it really clear that you're not getting paid anything for the recommendations in here, and you're giving recommendations, and people but here's what I put out there. So I mean, you're very open about that. So what is the outcome that you desire for people when they get this book?
I want this book to make it very, very clear that people can control their physical outcomes with minimal changes. And I really feel like this book will be infinitely more important for people, many, many, many people, high percentage of the people who get the book, than the 4-Hour Workweek. Because, quite frankly, you can't. The body is the basis of everything else. It is what houses the brain. It is what houses, therefore, all of your decisions. And I just feel like it is the single most important force multiplier, or it's the single most crippling handicap, depending on how you address it. And seeing how my dad went from being, 250 pounds at 5'6", and having everyone who loved him concerned for his health and fearing that he would die, to going into his annual review a year later and having his doctor say, you might just live forever. You're younger than you were a year ago. That type of experience is really hard to put a value on. I mean, it's valueless. It's priceless. And when you look at other case studies that have come out of just experimenting with a few pieces of this book, because, I've been testing this stuff for years now. And, you have people who have lost weight and then reversed fatty liver disease. And I'm not saying, again, I'm not a doctor, I'm not claiming to cure medical conditions, but you see some incredible, incredible outcomes. And I just want people to experiment, and I want them to be confident that they can make the changes, because there are some extreme case studies in the book. It's like, if there's somebody who's lost 120 pounds and is now running marathons, like, can you lose the last 10 pounds? Of course you can. Or, if there's somebody in the book who went from weighing, now, I'm not saying you want to do this again, but looking at the extremes can be very helpful. Somebody who went from about 150 pounds of muscular body weight to 310 pounds of muscular body weight. If somebody did that, can you put on 15 pounds of muscle? Yeah, absolutely. And I want people to, if they've given up on some aspect of themselves, whether that's how they look, whether that's endurance, whether that's running, whether that's skiing again, whether that's reversing injuries that they've had for 10 years, 15 years, I want them to feel like they should give that stuff another shot, and that's the goal of this book.
Yeah, it's really awesome. And so, there's one thing you talk about in the book, where the minimum effective dose, which you define as the smallest dose that will produce a desired outcome. Mm-hmm. And it's an amazing chapter. In really what I've taken away so far from what I've read, and what I know that how this whole entire book is laid out for people, is that, not that they're going to have to do a tremendous amount of stuff, but what is the minimum that people can do and literally get a result. And anything beyond that, you're just wasting time, you're wasting resources. And I think when you said this will be more important than the 4-hour work week, I mean, I have many friends who, that book has just absolutely changed their life, saved them time, saved them angst, got them doing vacations they never did before, not, being slaves to email all day long. I mean, they made a big impact, and I think this will do it on a much, much deeper level. And, let me indulge myself by reading your own stuff. How do you pronounce you say the Harajuku movement?
Oh, Harajuku, yep.
Yeah, Harajuku. You say in the beginning of that chapter, you say, for most of us, the how-to books on our shelves represent a growing to-do list, not advice we've followed. People suck at following advice. Even the most effective people in the world are terrible at it. There are two reasons. One, most people have an insufficient reason for action. The pain isn't painful enough. It's a nice-to-have, not a must-have. There has been no Harajuku moment. And then, two, there are no reminders, no consistent tracking, no awareness, no behavioral change. Consistent tracking, even if you have no knowledge of fat loss or exercise, will often beat advice from world-class trainers. So anyway, a couple of points there is, one, you really teach people the value of measuring, that everything measured is literally going to produce a result. And then you show them how to do things that require the minimum effective dose, and you've laid this out in a way so anyone can pick up this very big book, but read something very quickly and get some incredible impact without having to learn all the stuff that you've spent your life doing. And that's why I think it's, I sent you an email last night preparing for this interview, just basically saying I think this book is going to be a gigantic winner. In spite of the critics, in spite of the people that are, you're just going to be like, I cannot believe this guy's saying all this stuff. And when I say saying all this stuff, not that it's not founded, it's just, you're literally exposing total bullshit that exists in people's belief systems and proving it through your testing that this really is not the way that people think it is. And how many different minimum effective doses would you say are in this book that you think are applicable that would have huge changes in people's lives if they actually just picked up a few of them?
Oh, man. It's a cookbook. Just like the joy of cooking. This is like the joy of the human body. There are hundreds, but you would never sit down and try to use them all. But I would say for diet, for diet alone, there are probably 30, and you just pick the few small tweaks that are going to be easiest for you to incorporate, and then those combined will help you lose fat very, very rapidly. Whether it's for longevity or swimming, running, it's chock full. My goal, one of many goals with this book, was to make every chapter worth the price of the book itself. And there are 50 topics covered, right? So, and everybody, not everybody, but there was the very logical argument, like, split this up into 3 books. Why the hell are you putting this into one book? And my answer was, because I want this to be the definitive book. Like, people buy this, and they say to themselves, I'm done. I do not have to buy. I hopefully don't ever have to be confused about this ever again. And that's a very ambitious goal. I'm sure there are mistakes in the book. But when I say mistakes, I think it's not that I've picked the wrong things to do, because they all work. It's that maybe I'm explaining how they work incorrectly, but that doesn't matter. You don't have to understand how lipids work in order to lose body fat. Just like you don't have to understand how a microwave works in order to use a microwave. You just know, like, 1 minute on high, done, right? And similarly, it's like, okay, 80 seconds with this weight, with this many repetitions, done. It's the same type of minimal effective dose. So, there are hundreds of examples, but people can mix and match the way they want.
Awesome. Okay, so the book just came out. What sort of, for everyone that's actually listening to the interview, I'd love to have some sort of, special thing. At the same time, I want them to buy the book. So, go buy Tim's book, and if they buy multiple copies, is there something you can give them? Where do they go? How do people get a hold of this thing? It's available online, of course, bookstores, all that, but anything special you can do for Genius Network listeners?
Absolutely. So what I would say is that there were a number of chapters cut from the book, about 100 pages actually. It's incredible to believe that it got that big. But there were a number of really interesting chapters, like spot reduction. I looked at what I thought was the myth of spot reduction, the idea that you could use topical lotions to reduce fat on specific areas like your abs or your thighs, etc. And it ended up there actually are a few approaches that work for those stubborn areas. Or genetics testing. How do you do genetics testing to determine what type of supplementation will be most effective? Those types of things. So a lot of chapters were cut, not because they weren't good, just because the publisher had to contain their cost of printing. So if people buy 3 copies of the book, and we're coming up on the holidays, so it's a good gift book. If people buy 3 copies of the book, let's say 1 for themselves and 2 for gifts, if they send the Amazon receipt to Joe, J-O-E, at 4hourbody.com, so it's all spelled out, Joe at 4hourbody.com. If you buy 3 copies on Amazon, send the Amazon receipt to that email address. I will send one of the lost chapters, so to speak. And that's not in the book. At this point, you can't find it anywhere. So I'm happy to send those over as a bonus for people who want to get 3 copies. That would be my pleasure, and they're fun. It's fun content. I haven't figured out exactly which chapter I'm going to send out, just because I want to make sure I polish them up and make them as actionable as possible, as specific as possible. But if people buy 3 copies and send the Amazon receipt to Joe at 4hourbody.com, I'll send them some goodies.
Awesome. Well, Tim, as usual, you're always putting amazing stuff out there. What I do have to say is that not only is the book really incredibly filled with just usable, tactical, easy to understand strategies in many methods, but it's just really, really well written. I mean, my girlfriend, I got a pre-release copy when it sent to me, and basically, she literally read it until she was passing out. So she told me she just could not. I mean, she's like, this book is so fascinating. And when I sat down and started reading it, which literally it was just day before yesterday, it really is that good of a read. And so the first 10 pages is worth the price of this book by many, many times. So I think you've hit another one out of the park, and I cannot wait to see what happens. And so on behalf of myself and everyone at Genius Network, thank you, Tim, for taking the time to do this, and I would love to do a follow-up to this after we see the tidal wave that this creates as the book gets rolling. And so for everyone listening, get a copy of the book. I would highly recommend that you get it as a gift for somebody during the holidays and even into the new year, because it's theatrical the way this thing looks. It's gigantic, and the cover's awesome, and it's just a great book. So any famous last words before we just say it's a wrap?
Doing the impossible is not as hard as it seems if you test the assumptions the right way. That would be my closing statement.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks. Thanks so much.
Hello, this is Joe Polish. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this interview. I hope you found it very useful. Please give me your feedback on all of the interviews that you listen to. I'd love to hear your feedback so we can always deliver a great program for you. Our website is www.joepolish.com, and we also have a Joe Polish Recommends section, so you can take a lot of the ideas and concepts that you hear on my Genius Network interview series and apply them to your business and find vendors and resources. You can go to joepolish.com to find that information and click on the Joe Polish Recommends section. And also, if you would like to find out about more interviews and invest in more useful Genius Network series interviews, go to www.geniusnetwork.com. Thanks, and eat your competition alive.